Zoe stood on the grand stage, the bright lights above casting a glow on her face as the crowd cheered in anticipation. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced with the knowledge that this moment was more than just another event, it was a turning point. The backdrop behind her was a sleek, eco-friendly design, adorned with words that read "Sustainability for the Future." It was a perfect reflection of her mission, and the audience, a sea of eager faces, hung on to every word she spoke. As an outspoken environmental activist, Zoe had built her reputation on a foundation of passionate speeches and relentless advocacy. Over the years, she had grown from a local activist to a global voice, a beacon for those who believed in a future free from plastic and waste. On social media, her following was massive. Millions of people across the world had come to rely on her guidance, her unflinching commitment to a zero-waste lifestyle. For them, Zoe was the blueprint, an embodiment of what it meant to fight for the planet. No compromises, no excuses. Today, however, was different. This event, the annual Green Future Summit, wasn't just another gig for Zoe, it was an opportunity to ignite a movement. She took a deep breath before launching into her speech, her voice unwavering as she addressed the crowd. "We are at a crossroads," she began, her words cutting through the noise. "Every piece of plastic you touch is a reminder that our world is drowning in our own carelessness. Every bottle, every straw, every bag that finds its way into our oceans is a silent killer of life. This isn't just about change, it's about survival." Her words hit home for many in the crowd. She spoke not just as an activist, but as a mother, a sister, a daughter, urging people to consider the impact of their daily choices. "We have the power to make a difference," Zoe continued, her voice now rising with conviction. "It's not enough to talk about change, we must live it. From today onwards, let's pledge to reduce our consumption, to refuse single-use plastics, and to give our future generations a planet that they can thrive in." The applause that followed was deafening, but Zoe remained calm, her gaze sweeping across the audience as she took in the moment. This was the face of change, her face. The crowd was mesmerized, but it was more than just the words that captured them. It was the authenticity, the energy she exuded, the commitment she had shown for years in her personal life, in her activism, and through every post on social media. She wasn't just talking the talk, she was living proof of what it meant to walk the walk. As Zoe left the stage, the echo of her speech lingered in the air. To many, she was the embodiment of hope, the eco-warrior who stood tall against the plastic epidemic. But what they didn't know was that even the most dedicated activists had their own struggles, their own moments of doubt. And as the lights dimmed, Zoe began to question how much longer she could live up to the reputation she had so carefully built. Zoe sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers drumming against the worn wood of her nightstand. The room, dimly lit by the glow of her phone screen, reflected the exhaustion she felt after a long day of meetings, speeches, and social media posts. On the surface, everything appeared perfect, her brand was flawless, her followers loyal, and her message resonated across the globe. Yet, here she was, alone, scrolling through her feed, and it was hard to ignore the nagging feeling in her gut. A post from earlier that morning, a picture of her with a bamboo straw in hand, was now flooded with likes and comments. But beneath the praise, Zoe felt a deep, unsettling disconnect. The life she portrayed online wasn't entirely her own. Beneath the polished image of an eco-warrior, there was a woman struggling to keep up with the constant pressure to be perfect, to live up to the ideals she preached. Her fridge, though stocked with organic produce, was also filled with packaged foods, cereal boxes wrapped in plastic, frozen meals encased in single-use plastic trays. The grocery bags she used were reusable, but she had forgotten them again today. A coffee cup from her local cafe, one she'd promised herself would be her last, sat on the counter, its plastic lid staring at her like a silent judgment. She had been so careful about everything in her life, but the truth was, the pressure of maintaining her green image was suffocating. Zoe often found herself rushing from one event to another, grabbing whatever was convenient, whether it was a quick lunch in a plastic container or a drink in a single-use bottle because it was the only option available. The world around her was designed to make sustainability a challenge, yet she had to keep up the charade of perfection. Her followers, thousands of them, saw Zoe as a role model, the ideal environmentalist who never compromised. They admired her for being so unwavering, so diligent. They posted her speeches, shared her blogs, and tagged her in every eco-friendly initiative they took. They saw her as the epitome of green living. But Zoe knew better. She knew the truth. There were days when she felt like a fraud, constantly pretending to have it all together. She had to be at her best, all the time, not just for herself but for her followers. If she slipped, if she faltered, she risked losing everything: the trust, the influence, the platform. But at what cost? Zoe was starting to realize that the pressure to embody perfection was eating away at her authenticity. The more she tried to fit into this idealized version of herself, the further she drifted from the person she truly wanted to be. A text message buzzed on her phone, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was from her assistant. "Your next event is in 2 hours. Don't forget the press kit and eco-friendly giveaways." Zoe sighed, glancing at the bags of bottled water scattered around her apartment from various events she'd attended earlier in the week. It felt impossible to escape the grip of the very industry she was trying to change. The contradiction of it all weighed heavily on her heart. She was fighting for a world where sustainability was the norm, where every choice mattered. Yet here she was, unable to live up to the very standards she set for others. The idealized life of a perfect eco-warrior was starting to feel more like a trap. Zoe rushed through the crowded streets, her heels clicking against the pavement as the clock ticked closer to her next meeting. The climate summit had been a success, but now she was running late for a business pitch that could help fund her next environmental project. As she darted between pedestrians, her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since breakfast. She stepped into a nearby convenience store, hoping to grab something quick. The line was long, and her anxiety built with every passing second. As the clerk scanned her items, Zoe reached for a bottle of water. She told herself it would be a quick refreshment. But as she grabbed the bottle, she realized it was plastic. She hesitated, but then, against her better judgment, she paid and stuffed the bottle into her bag. Rushing out, she stopped at a kiosk to pick up a snack, a small convenience food wrapped in plastic. She quickly shoved it into her bag and continued on her way. Another stop. Another plastic bottle. It wasn't just one anymore, it was several. Bottles, wrappers, cups, all accumulating in her hands, filling her bag as she juggled them in a frenzy. The irony was unbearable. How had this happened? Zoe, the woman who preached about sustainability, who urged the world to reject plastic, was now clutching it in every hand. Her breath caught in her throat as she stood frozen in the middle of the sidewalk, looking down at the items she had just purchased. The plastic was everywhere. The very thing she had fought against for years was now filling her life in ways she hadn't even noticed. Zoe's mind raced, the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. She could already feel the wave of hypocrisy crashing over her. How could she stand in front of thousands of people and condemn single-use plastic when here she was, caught in its grasp? Her fingers tightened around the plastic bottles, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a crushing sense of failure. She wasn't just late for a meeting. She was late to confront the reality of her own contradictions. It wasn't just about the plastic. It was about the facade, the perfect eco-warrior she had built for the world to see, and now it was unraveling right in front of her. Zoe hurried to the meeting, but the shame lingered. The bag filled with bottles and wrappers felt like an anchor, dragging her deeper into the recognition that maybe she wasn't as perfect as everyone thought. And maybe, just maybe, she was more human than she had ever allowed herself to admit. The next morning, Zoe woke to the sound of her phone vibrating relentlessly on the nightstand. Bleary-eyed, she reached for it, expecting the usual morning updates. Instead, her notifications were flooded with messages, tags, and mentions from people across the globe. She blinked, trying to make sense of it all. And then she saw it, a video clip posted by a news outlet. The footage showed her from yesterday, standing on the street, clutching multiple plastic bottles and snack wrappers. The camera zoomed in on her as she fumbled with her phone, clearly trying to hide the evidence. The caption read, "Eco-warrior caught red-handed, Zoe, the face of sustainability, holds plastic bottles." Her heart sank. The video was already viral, spreading like wildfire. It was everywhere: news websites, social media, even the late-night talk shows. People were mocking her, calling her a hypocrite, a fraud. It felt like the entire world was watching her collapse. Minutes later, her phone rang. It was Claire, her publicist, her voice tight with panic. "Zoe, they want you for an interview." "It's urgent, before the damage gets worse," Zoe agreed reluctantly, knowing she had no choice. A few hours later, she sat in front of a camera, the weight of the world on her shoulders. The journalist, a well-known TV host, wasted no time in diving straight into the controversy. "So, Zoe," the journalist began, a smug smile on his face, "yesterday, you were caught on camera buying several single-use plastic bottles and plastic-wrapped snacks. Care to explain how this aligns with your supposed commitment to the environment?" Zoe tried to keep her composure, her mind racing for the right words. Look, I'm not perfect," she began, her voice shaky. "I try to live by my principles every day, but sometimes life gets in the way. Yesterday was chaotic, and I was in a rush." "It wasn't intentional," the journalist cut her off. "So, is it safe to say that your entire eco-friendly image is nothing more than a marketing stunt? You've spent years telling us to avoid plastic, to be mindful of waste, and here you are, caught in a moment of complete contradiction." Zoe's stomach twisted. The words stung more than she expected. "No, that's not what it is at all. I've worked tirelessly to promote sustainability, and yes, I slip up sometimes. But that doesn't make me a hypocrite. It makes me human." The journalist leaned forward, his expression less empathetic now, more accusatory. "But you've built an empire on this perfect image of environmentalism. People trust you. You've sold them this idea of perfection. And now, this moment of recklessness shatters that. How can anyone take your message seriously now?" Zoe's voice faltered, the emotional toll of the moment hitting her harder than she anticipated. "I'm not asking anyone to see me as perfect. I'm asking them to see that we all have a responsibility to do better, even if we make mistakes." The interview continued, but Zoe knew the damage was done. Her social media exploded with criticism. Her followers, once loyal, were divided. Some stood by her, empathizing with her human flaws, while others felt betrayed. The media tore into her, labeling her the eco-hypocrite, and some of her closest supporters questioned her authenticity. Zoe left the interview drained, the weight of her contradictions pressing down on her. She had tried to explain herself, but it felt like nothing would ever be the same again. The public had spoken, and she wasn't sure she could repair the damage. Zoe's phone buzzed incessantly as she scrolled through her social media feed, her heart sinking with each notification. The backlash was worse than she'd imagined. Comment after comment filled her notifications: fraud, eco-hypocrite, plastic advocate. Her eyes stung as she read through the messages, each one more scathing than the last. It felt as if the entire world was turning on her, and all she had built in years of activism was crumbling before her eyes. Her Instagram feed, once full of inspiring images of sustainable living, now displayed harsh criticisms. Followers who once praised her for her commitment to the environment were now questioning her every move. The video of her holding multiple plastic bottles had gone viral, and the comments were relentless. "Is this really the face of change? I guess the eco-friendly persona was just a show," one user posted. Another wrote, "You've been pushing us to change, but you can't even practice what you preach. Pathetic." Zoe sat in silence, feeling the weight of the words pressing on her chest. She had spent years carefully crafting the perfect image of the eco-warrior, always on point with her messaging, always advocating for sustainable living. But now, it felt like everything was being torn apart. She had become a symbol of hypocrisy, someone who had failed the very people who looked up to her. Her thoughts raced as she began to type a response. "I'm not perfect," she wrote. "I've always been open about the struggles of living a truly sustainable life in a world built on consumerism. I am still trying, and I'm still learning. This doesn't make me a fraud." But as she read over her words, she hesitated. Could an apology really fix this? Could a few sentences of explanation repair the damage done to her credibility? The pressure to defend herself weighed heavily, But with every attempt to explain herself, the negativity only seemed to intensify. She tried again. "We all make mistakes. I'm not asking for perfection, just for progress." But the replies were already flooding in, calling her a hypocrite, demanding she step down as the face of environmentalism. Zoe's fingers hovered over the keyboard, but this time, she didn't type. She closed her eyes, leaning back in the chair. How could she reconcile the image of the perfect activist with the reality of her imperfection? Her life was not the spotless, zero-waste existence she portrayed online. She struggled with convenience, with temptation, just like everyone else. But admitting that felt like betrayal. She couldn't be both Zoe the perfect eco-warrior and Zoe the flawed human. Despite the barrage of hate, there were a few comments that stood out, a handful of people who defended her. "We all slip up. Stop tearing her down for being human," one comment read. Another user posted, "I still believe in what she's doing. No one's perfect, and Zoe has done more for sustainability than most of us ever will." But even as the support came in, it felt too little, too late. Zoe knew she had lost something vital, the image of infallibility she had worked so hard to maintain. Now, all she could do was watch as her once steadfast following began to fracture. Her thoughts spiraled. She had built a platform on ideals that now felt unattainable. How could she inspire others when she, herself, was struggling so much? As the comments piled up, Zoe wondered if she could ever reclaim the trust she had lost. Zoe locked her phone and stared at the blank wall in front of her, the silence in the room deafening. She had shut out the world, refusing to engage with the media, her followers, and even her closest friends. The barrage of criticism from the past few days had taken its toll, and now, she was left with only her thoughts. She needed space, time to think, and time to come to terms with the chaos she had caused. It had always been easy to speak about sustainability from a pedestal, to preach about the importance of reducing plastic and living a zero-waste life. But now that pedestal felt fragile, too fragile to support her. The criticism had shattered the illusion she had so carefully built. She had positioned herself as the ideal environmentalist, someone who could do no wrong, but in doing so, she had ignored her own humanity. The truth hit her like a wave: no one, not even her, could be perfect. Not all the time. The world was fast, consumer-driven, and relentless. In a society built on convenience and instant gratification, it was nearly impossible to maintain an entirely sustainable lifestyle. And yet, for years, Zoe had held herself to the impossible standard of perfection. She had told others to avoid plastic, to make every choice count, but she hadn't been honest about her own struggles with those ideals. Zoe walked over to her window, looking out at the busy city below. People hurried through the streets, all focused on their tasks, their phones, their lives. She felt a pang of envy. They weren't concerned with the weight of the world on their shoulders like she was. They weren't being torn apart by the expectations of others. But in that moment, Zoe realized something important: the world wasn't asking for perfection, it was asking for progress. Small steps forward, not giant leaps toward an unreachable ideal. She sat back down on the couch, her mind racing. For the first time in days, she felt clarity. Her mission wasn't to be flawless, it was to make a difference, no matter how small that difference might seem. The plastic bottle she had held the day before wasn't a symbol of failure, it was a reminder of the challenges everyone faced in this fast-paced world. It didn't diminish her efforts, but it made her realize that perfection wasn't the end goal. Progress was. Zoe knew that she couldn't change the past. She couldn't erase the video or the accusations that had followed. But she could learn from it. She could be real with herself and her followers. She could stop pretending to be the perfect eco-warrior and instead embrace the complexity of being human. It wasn't about living in a bubble of ideals, it was about making real, tangible changes, even if those changes weren't always perfect. With a deep breath, Zoe began to plan. She would address her followers, not with excuses, but with honesty. She would share her struggles, her missteps, and her journey toward progress. It was time to shift the conversation, to remind people that change wasn't about flawless execution, but about trying, learning, and moving forward. The world needed progress, not perfection, and Zoe was ready to lead by example. Zoe sat in front of the camera, the familiar lights shining down on her. But this time, there was no script, no rehearsed speech. This was different. She took a deep breath and began, her voice steady but honest. "Yesterday, I was caught holding plastic bottles," she began. "And yes, it was a mistake. A moment where I didn't live up to the image I've worked so hard to create." She paused, letting the words sink in. "But here's the thing. I've always talked about the importance of transparency, of being real about the journey. So today, I'm going to do just that." Zoe's message wasn't just about the mistake, it was about everything that came after. The shame. The pressure. The perfectionism. But more than that, it was about moving forward. She wasn't perfect, and she no longer wanted to pretend she was. "I can't expect anyone to follow a path that seems impossible. We're all human, and we all make mistakes," Zoe continued. "But that doesn't mean we stop trying." She smiled softly, looking directly into the camera. "I'm launching a new campaign. It's not about perfection, it's about progress. Every time you choose a reusable bottle over plastic, or bring your own shopping bags, or say no to single-use plastic, you're moving in the right direction. Even the smallest change counts." The campaign, which she had already begun promoting on social media, was centered around forgiveness and self-compassion. We live in a world full of temptations. A world that pushes convenience over sustainability. It's hard, I get it. But we can't let the pursuit of perfection stop us from making any progress at all. Zoe's words resonated with the audience. She wasn't asking for blind dedication to a flawless lifestyle, she was inviting people to embrace their imperfections and do their best. She shared her own challenges, openly admitting how difficult it was to live sustainably in a world filled with plastic-wrapped everything. "There are days when I still forget my reusable bags. There are days when I make a purchase that doesn't align with my values. And that's okay. It doesn't define me." Her message was clear: sustainability was a journey, not a destination. It was about doing what you could, when you could, without guilt. The video went live, and the response was immediate. Followers who had previously criticized her for the slip-up began to express their support. Many shared their own stories of trying to live sustainably, acknowledging their own struggles with perfection. The hashtag progress not perfection trended across social media, as people everywhere joined in to support her new vision. Zoe felt a sense of relief wash over her as she read through the messages of support. The weight of trying to be perfect, of maintaining a flawless image, had lifted. In embracing her humanity, she had created a more authentic and compassionate narrative for herself and her followers. As she scrolled through the comments, Zoe smiled. The journey wasn't over, but she was no longer pretending to be someone she wasn't. The road ahead was filled with challenges, but she was ready to face them, one small change at a time. Zoe stood on stage once again, but this time, the weight she carried was different. It wasn't the weight of perfection, nor the pressure to be flawless. It was the weight of honesty, of vulnerability, and of the responsibility to lead not with an image of idealism, but with a message of progress. Her recent misstep had become a catalyst for change, not only in her own life but in the way she now viewed sustainability. The world didn't need another perfect eco-warrior, it needed a leader who was willing to be real, to admit that the path toward a better planet was filled with challenges, and that the journey was just as important as the destination. "I've spent years telling you how to be perfect, how to live sustainably without compromise," Zoe said, addressing the crowd at a new event she was hosting. "But I've learned that perfection is a myth, and I'm here to tell you that that's okay." She paused, her eyes scanning the room of eager faces. "What matters is the effort. What matters is the change we make, one choice at a time, without expecting it to be perfect." Her voice had changed. It was softer, more grounded, more real. Zoe no longer tried to project an image of unshakable certainty. Instead, she spoke from experience, from a place of understanding that sustainability was a continuous, evolving journey. "I know it's hard," she continued. "I know it's tempting to fall back into old habits. But every small step counts. If we can each make one better decision today, and then another tomorrow, we will build a better world. Her message wasn't about demanding that her followers live up to some unattainable standard. It was about encouraging them to meet themselves where they were, to celebrate every small victory along the way. And as Zoe engaged with her audience, she began to see the impact of her new, authentic approach. The responses were different now, more personal, more connected. People shared their own struggles, their own wins. The conversation had shifted from perfection to progress. On her social media platforms, Zoe actively interacted with her followers, responding to their posts, acknowledging their efforts, and offering words of encouragement. She no longer posted flawless, curated images of a perfect green life. Instead, she shared photos of real moments, the reusable coffee cup she forgot to bring, the composting project that didn't go as planned, the eco-friendly products she was trying out. It wasn't about being perfect, it was about being transparent, about showing the reality of living sustainably in a world designed for convenience. Zoe's new campaign, #SustainablyReal, took off. It wasn't just another hashtag, it was a movement. People from all over the world joined in, posting their own imperfect, authentic sustainability journeys. The movement grew into something bigger than Zoe ever expected, a community of people supporting each other, not in their quest for perfection, but in their shared commitment to trying, to learning, and to growing. As the story came to a close, Zoe realized that she was no longer the face of a movement based on unrealistic ideals. She was the face of a new kind of eco-conscious movement, one that celebrated growth over perfection, understanding over judgment, and compassion over critique. The road ahead was still long, but Zoe knew that with each step forward, no matter how small, they were all creating something better together.